talk about your time allocation, I think one of the things you spend an awful lot of time thinking about, I know, is artificial intelligence. It's something that you and I have as a shared interest, and it's something that our audience is interested in as well. The question here is, a lot of experts in AI don't share the same level of concern that you do about the dangers of AI.
Fools.
What
Famous last words.
What specifically do you believe that they don't?
Well, the biggest issue I see with so-called AI experts is that they think they know more than they do. And they think they're smarter than they actually are. In general, we are all much smarter than we think we are, but much less smart, dumber than we think we are, by a lot. So this tends to plague smart people. They just can't. They define themselves by their intelligence, and they don't like the idea that a machine could be way smarter than them. So they discount the idea, which is fundamentally flawed. That's the wishful thinking situation. I'm really quite close to, I'm very close to the cutting edge in AI, and it scares the hell out of me. It's capable of vastly more than almost anyone knows, and the rate of improvement is exponential. You can see this in things like AlphaGo, which went from, in the span of maybe 6 to 9 months, it went from being unable to beat even a reasonably good Go player to then beating the European world champion, who was ranked 600, then beating Lee Sedol 4-5, who had been world champion for many years, then beating the current world champion, then beating everyone while playing simultaneously. Then there was AlphaZero, which crushed AlphaGo 100-0. And AlphaZero just learned by playing itself, and it can play basically any game that you put the rules in for. Whatever rules you give it literally read the rules, play the game, and be superhuman. For any game. Nobody expected that rate of improvement. If you ask those same experts who think AI is not progressing at the rate that I'm saying, I think you will find that their predictions for things like Go and other AI advancements have their batting average is quite weak. It's not good. We'll see this also with self-driving. I think probably by end of next year, self-driving will encompass essentially all modes of driving and be at least 100 to 200% safer than a person by the end of next year. We're talking like maybe 18 months from now. NHTSA did a study on Tesla's Autopilot version 1, which is relatively primitive, and found that it was a 45% reduction in highway accidents. And that's despite Autopilot 1 being just version 1. Version 2, I think, will be at least 2 or 3 times better. That's the current version that's running right now. So the rate of improvement is really dramatic. We have to figure out some way to ensure that the advent of digital superintelligence is one which is symbiotic with humanity. I think that's the single biggest existential crisis that we face, and the most pressing one.
And how do we do that? I mean, if we take it that it's inevitable at this point, that some version of AI is coming down the line, how do we steer through that?
Well, I'm not normally an advocate of regulation and oversight. I mean, I think one should generally err on the side of minimizing those things. But this is a case where you have a very serious danger to the public. And so therefore, there needs to be a public body that has insight and then oversight to confirm that everyone is developing AI safely. This is extremely important. I think the danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear warheads, by a lot. And nobody would suggest that we allow anyone to just build nuclear warheads if they want. That would be insane. And mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes. Far. So why do we have no regulatory oversight? This is insane.
Well, it's a question you've been asking for a long time. I think it's a question that's come to the forefront over the last year where you begin to realize that it doesn't necessarily, I think if we've all been focused in on the idea of artificial superintelligence, right? Which is clearly a danger, but maybe, a little further out. What's happened over the last year is you've seen what I've been calling artificial stupidity. You're talking about, algorithmic manipulation of social media. Like we're in it now. It's starting to happen. How do we, what's the intervention at this point?
I'm not really all that worried about the short-term stuff. Things that are, like narrow AI is not a species-level risk. It will result in dislocation, in lost jobs, and that sort of better weaponry and that kind of thing. But it is not a fundamental species-level risk, whereas digital superintelligence is. So it's really all about laying the groundwork to make sure that if humanity collectively decides that creating digital superintelligence is the right move, then we should do so very, very carefully. Very, very carefully. This is the most important thing that we could possibly do.
Yeah. Building on that, other than AI and the other issues that you're tackling, transportation, energy production, aerospace, what issues should our next generation of leaders be focused on solving? What else is coming down the line?
Well, I mean, there are other things that are on a longer time scale. And obviously the things that I believe in, like extending life beyond Earth, making life multiplanetary. I'm a big believer in sort of Asimov's foundation series, or the principle that you really want to, I recommend reading the foundation series, but it's like if you know that there's likely to be, we don't know, but there's likely to be another Dark Ages, which it seems, my guess is there probably will be at some point. I'm not predicting that we're about to enter Dark Ages, but that there's some probability that we will, particularly if there's a Third World War. Then we want to make sure that there's enough of a seed of human civilization somewhere else to bring civilization back, and perhaps shorten the length of the Dark Ages. I think that's why it's important to get a self-sustaining base, ideally on Mars, because Mars is far enough away from Earth that a war on Earth, the Mars base might survive. It's more likely to survive than a moon base. But I think a moon base and a Mars base that could perhaps help regenerate life back here on Earth would be really important, and to get that done before a possible World War III. Last century we had 2 massive world wars, 3 if you count the Cold War. I think it's unlikely that we will never have another world war again. There probably will be at some point.
Or if we have another one, it'll be the last.
Yeah, it just could be radioactive rubble, So, again, I'm not predicting. It just seems like, well, if you say given enough time, will it be? Most likely, given enough time. This has been our pattern in the past. Like I really believe in the zeroth law of Asimov's zeroth law. You're going to take the set of actions most likely to support humanity into the future. But I think sustainable energy is also obviously really important. It's tautological. If it's not sustainable, it's unsustainable.
Yeah, how close are we to solving that problem?
Well, I think that the core technologies are there with wind, solar, with batteries. The fundamental problem is that there's an unpriced externality in the cost of CO2. The market economics works very well if things are priced correctly, but when things are not priced correctly, and something that has a real cost has zero cost, then that's where you get distortions in the market that inhibit the progress of of other technologies. So essentially anything that produces carbon, it puts carbon into the atmosphere, which includes rockets, by the way. So I'm not excluding rockets from this. There has to be a price, and that you can start off with a low price, but then that price, and then depending upon whether that price has any effect on the parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, you can adjust that price up or down. But in the absence of a price, we sort of pretend that digging trillions of tons of fossil fuels from deep under the earth and putting it into the atmosphere, we're pretending that has no probability of a bad outcome. And the entire scientific community is saying, obviously, it's going to have a bad outcome. Obviously, you're changing the chemical constituency of the atmosphere. So, so it's really up to people and governments to put a price on carbon, and then automatically the right thing happens. It's really straightforward.
What do we do with the carbon that's already up there?
I actually think we can manage with the current carbon level, or even a little bit higher. And this is going to sound like I'm backtracking, but there's actually an argument that more carbon in the atmosphere is actually good, but up to a point. So we might actually arguably have been a little carbon starved. If you go back 200 years ago and say, okay, well, a few hundred years ago, we had like 280, 290 parts per million of carbon. We're probably a little carbon starved. Now we're about 400, just past 400 mark. I think somewhere in the 400s, probably okay. We don't have to worry about sequestering carbon or anything like that. But now, if this momentum keeps going, and we start going up to 600, 800, 1,000, 1,500, that's where things get really squirrely. The sheer momentum of the world's energy infrastructure is leading us in that direction. So it's just very important that the public and the governments push to ensure that the correct price of carbon is paid. So that will be the thing that matters. Yeah.
Our audience is very interested in knowing how many hours of sleep you got last night.
I don't know, about 6, 5 or 6, I think. 5? I don't know.
I feel like we know part of the answer to this because you were trapped in Westworld for a while. But how? I mean, on a regular day for you, are you sleeping? You're not sleeping a lot, right?
Oh, geez, do I look that bad?
No. You look great.
Oh,
but we just imagine with the amount of responsibilities, with the amount of with what you've got going on, do these problems still keep you up at night, or do you think we're on our way to solving them?
Well, right now the only things that are really stressing me out in a big way are AI, obviously. That's like always there, and I'm working really hard on Tesla Model 3 production, we're making good progress, but it's hugely hard work. But those are the two most stressful things in my life right now. Yeah.
Our audience really wants to know, what do you hope the world will look like for children born today when they're your age?
When, sorry?
What do you hope for the world to look like? What's the best case scenario? Say we solve these problems. What's that world look like?
Let's see. So, I think a good future would look like, we really substantially transferred to sustainable generation and consumption of electricity, so that the CO2 risk and the ocean rising risk is mitigated, and we're not looking at having Florida and sort of large portions of the world underwater. That'd be great. Not to have addressed that risk. That'd be enormous. For us to have a base on the moon, base on Mars, be out there exploring the solar system, start building industry on essentially having human civilization go out there, and have it be such that anyone can go to the moon or Mars or out to the solar system if they want, to making it really affordable. I do think it's important that there's competition, that there are multiple companies doing this, not just SpaceX. And that AI risk is that I guess there's sort of a benign AI, and that we're able to achieve a symbiosis with that AI. Ideally, the AI, there's somebody who, I can't remember his name, but had a good suggestion for what the optimization of the AI should be, what's its utility function. You have to be careful about this, because if you say maximize happiness, and the AI concludes that happiness is a function of dopamine and serotonin, so it captures all humans and jacks your brain with large amounts of dopamine and serotonin. Like, okay, it's not what we meant.
It sounds pretty good, though.
Oh, you'll love it. Well, I like the definition of, like, the AI should try to maximize the freedom of action of humanity. Maximize the freedom of action. Maximize freedom, essentially. I like that definition. But we do want a close coupling between collective human intelligence and digital intelligence. And Neuralink is trying to help in that regard by creating an interface between, a high bandwidth interface between AI and human brain. We're already a cyborg in the sense that your phone and your computer are kind of an extension of you.
Just low bandwidth input output.
Exactly, it's just low bandwidth, particularly output. I mean, 2 thumbs basically.
So how do we solve that problem?
The bandwidth thing?
The bandwidth issue. I mean, we've all succumbed to it now. We're all cyborgs. We're just low efficiency cyborgs. So how do we make it better?
I think we've got to build an interface. Like, we didn't evolve to have a communications jack, or some. So there's got to be essentially vast numbers of tiny electrodes that are able to read write from your brain. Of course, security is pretty important in this situation, to say the least.
I was going to say, I'm not coming with. I'm keeping my brain air-gapped.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people will choose to do that. But it's a bit like Ian Banks' neural lace. Mm-hmm. But in the case of neural lace, it's sort of that's there from when you're born, or it's more of a
backup.
Sorry?
It's a backup.
Yeah, kind of a backup. This would be, there's a digital extension of you that is an AI, the AI extension of you, a tertiary layer of intelligence. So you've got your limbic system, your cortex, and the tertiary layer, which is the digital AI extension of you. And that high bandwidth connection is what achieves a tight symbiosis. I think that's the best outcome. I hope so. If anybody's got better ideas, I'd love to hear it.
Talk about another project that you're working on that our audience wants to know a little bit more about, Starlink.
Oh.
Can you tell us anything?
Do you mean Skynet?
Hopefully not Skynet.
It's an internet in the sky. Well, we don't talk that much about Starlink, but essentially it's intended to provide low latency, high bandwidth internet connectivity throughout the world. There actually will not be enough cognitive processing power on board the satellite system to in any way be a Skynet thing. Like, it's digital AI requires a lot of, superintelligence requires a lot of big servers on the ground. It's too power intensive. But this is intended to provide people with who don't have any internet connectivity with internet connectivity, and it's very good for sparse and sparsely populated and moderately sparsely populated areas, and for giving people in cities a choice of low-cost choice of internet access. But I do think it's going to be important. The Starlink system will be important in providing the funding necessary for SpaceX to develop interplanetary spacecraft. and at the same time, yeah, helping people who have either no or super expensive connectivity and giving people in urban areas more of a competitive choice.
Very cool. I have to ask you because it's the number one question. Just going back to Mars, what kind of government do you envision for the first Martian colony?
So we're have to be careful
and what's your title?
Yeah, exactly. Emperor or God Emperor? I don't know. It might be too much. I don't know. If you watch my jokes here, not everyone gets irony. You know, must remember. So I think I think most likely the form of government on Mars would be somewhat of a direct democracy, where you vote on issues, where people vote directly on issues, instead of going through representative government. When the United States was formed, representative government was the only thing that was logistically feasible, because it was no way for people to communicate instantly. A lot of people didn't even have really access to mailboxes, or there wasn't even really the post office was very primitive. A lot of people couldn't write. So you had to have some form of representative democracy, or things just wouldn't work at all. But I think on Mars, most likely it's going to be everyone votes on every issue, and that's how it goes. There are a few things I'd recommend, which is keep laws short. Long laws, it's like that's something suspicious is going on if there's a long law. If the size of the law exceeds the word count of Lord of the Rings, something size of the law that you should be able to digest it. Like, how come you can read the Constitution and all of the amendments? Like, you can read those in maybe an hour. And we govern so much of our civilization by that, and yet modern law is this obtuse, super boring tome that's indecipherable to almost anyone. So I think direct democracy, laws that are comprehensible. I think having some kind of hysteresis on, like, it should be easier to remove a law than create one, because things just get to inertia. You have to have something that's going to overcome inertia. So probably, I don't know what the right number would be, maybe it's like 60-40. Maybe it requires 60% to get a law in place, but any number above 40% can remove a law. Otherwise, you just get laws just accumulate over time, and it's sort of like Gulliver, where you just get trapped by all these tiny strings and you can't move. You get hardening of the arteries of civilization with rules and rules and rules and rules. So it should be just easier to get rid of a rule than to put one in. Maybe they should even have like some kind of sunset clause, so that they just automatically expire unless there's enough of an impetus to keep them around.
I know there's a fair amount of interest. I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about the very early days with Tesla and how it came together. Your brother Kimball is here. I thought we'd bring him out.
Sure.
You guys could talk a little bit about it.